I knew that wouldn't work. I was told that wouldn't work. But hello, welcome to Who's Views and a very special edition of our show, because today we are celebrating that unique and very special relationship between the two longest running shows on BBC television. Yes, we've got our very own Doctor Who, the longest running science fiction show in the world. Also, we've got Blue Peter, the longest children's television show in the world. And they've actually had a fantastic relationship from more or less the very beginning, haven't they, really? There isn't anybody in Britain that couldn't have heard of Blue Peter. Are we all agreed on that?
Definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Not unless they've gone into hiding or slept for the last 60 odd years or so. That is possible. But I doubt it.
Well, it could be possible. I hope not, but it could be possible. Oh, we've just lost. He'll be back, I'm sure. I'm sure Brendan will be back.
He's muddling this time, I'm sure, this very moment.
No, he's been time scooped. For those of you outside the United Kingdom who are wondering, what is Blue Peter, then we'll just give you a quick recap. Blue Peter is the longest running children's television programme in the world. It first appeared on BBC One in October, the 16th of October, 1958, presented by Christopher Trace and Layla Williams. And the programme grew and grew and grew. And when Doctor Who arrived in 1963, Blue Peter was there, ready and watching. And then, of course, when the Daleks appeared in 1964, that's when the special relationship that we're going to be looking at and remembering and fondly giving you our memories about actually really took off. So Blue Peter is a magazine show for children. And since 1964, it really has publicised Doctor Who in a way that no other show has. This is a fan Dalek with the original presenter Christopher Trace. So they used to show things like fan Daleks. They would publicize the television show itself. This is the War Machines, obviously. They would get fans on to talk about it. I mean, they really did their part for Doctor Who. They also, in 1964, reacted to Dalek mania in a unique way, because they came up with this. This is the BBC Blue Peter Doctor Who Dalek. Now, they had so many children writing into the Blue Peter office back, they say, oh, you've got to make a Dalek, you've got to make a Dalek, that the editor, Biddy Baxter, the famous Biddy Baxter, went to Raymond Cusick, who of course designed the Daleks for Doctor Who, and said, we want something on something like 5 shillings or something like that, not very much money, what can you do? So together with his colleague, they came up with this. And as you can see, this is made from all sorts of stuff that were around the house at the time, including the infamous sink plunger and ping pong balls. And I can guarantee you that this would have been hugely popular back in 1964. And it's very likely that the day after that, every house in Britain had a build your own Dalek. In fact, the statistics say, the official statistics say that a lot of children wrote in to ask for that fact sheet, to say, can I have the fact sheet so I can make it? Of course, we know now it looks absolutely nothing like a Dalek. But back in 1964, who cared?
Can I ask JT, was it true from memory? I have a vague memory that Raymond Cusick got a gold Blue Peter badge for the make. Is that right? Is that true?
It's absolutely true. Yes, because live on air, Mr. Trace, there, the original Blue Peter presenter, he was always very enthusiastic, apparently. And in the clips that still exist of his episodes, another BBC famous "we wiped everything" incident, you can actually see him. Actually, this is fantastic. This is wonderful. And doesn't it deserve a gold Blue Peter badge? Which apparently didn't please Biddy Baxter, the editor at the time, because those Blue Peter gold badges only have to go to very special things, very special thing. None of us here have any memory of that, of course, because that's before our time.
We're all far too young.
We are far too young, luckily. Let's have a look in the chat and see who's given to us. Listen, Who viewers? Who's got some views of Blue Peter? Who remembers some Blue Peter? We've got Jamie Reese here who's saying hello. Pete's here. Hello. Just Jordan. She's back. We didn't scare her off last time. Hello there.
Oh, welcome back. How good is that?
And Pete's saying hello all on the panel. Thank you for joining us. Nice to see you all. So this is our WHOTASTIC panel talking about our memories of Blue Peter in this as another part of our celebration of Doctor Who's 60th anniversary year. And what more do you need in an anniversary year than a cake? And yes, Blue Peter came in on that one too, because back in 1966, Valerie Singleton invited a couple of friends over to the Blue Peter studio there, and she made them some cakes. The infamous Dalek cakes. Now that is what we can now call a walnut whip with a marshmallow stuck on the top of it. But of course, BBC, it wasn't a walnut whip. It was a whipped surprise.
Other confectionery is available, just to say that.
She also made these proper cakes. Now, that on the right, by the way, are sandwiches. They made savoury sandwiches out of obviously cut bread and what have you. But that cake there is famous because that was the chocolate with chocolate Smarties. I don't know what they're called these. They're probably the same thing. And licorice. Things that would generally make the kids of today hyper for weeks. And, you know, you're encouraged to it. So this is 2 Swiss rolls cemented together. The brilliant thing about Blue Peter is they are never one to waste an idea. And because generations, the show is still going. It is 65 years old this year. And because it's still going, they did it again years later when Doctor Who came back after its reboot and tarted them up a little bit. Aren't they gorgeous?
Delicious.
Delicious. Absolutely.
Are those new paradigm Daleks?
It looks like it's in there.
Look a bit, you know, like the hunched Daleks of Notre Dame, as I call them. You know, they look a bit that.
The only good thing about that, John, is you get more cake
and chocolate.
You needed them
now,
Dalek.
In true Blue Peter style, I actually wanted to show you a make, as we call it, as they called it on Blue Peter. I wanted to show you how to make one of those Swiss roll Dalek cakes, and I had all the ingredients, but I was a little bit earlier, hungry before the show, and I ate the Swiss roll. So I'm very sorry about that. But you can get it on YouTube. You can go to YouTube and you can watch it.
I thought you were going to do a live bake.
I was going to do similar as well, but unfortunately, I had my whipped surprise before we came on in as well, but I didn't eat anything.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Nice comments coming here.
John, I was going to say, I've seen that clip you're talking about on YouTube and on the various DVDs that these clips are on, and it really makes me laugh every time the Daleks say they think there's too much chocolate on the cakes, and I wonder if there's a little bit of a message from the Daleks. I've got a chocolate allergy. Who knows? So Taran don't. That's right.
It could be that. Now, one thing we also have to say right at the top of the show here, because we're going to be talking about them a fair few times during this particular show, is that another link between Blue Peter and Doctor Who was, of course, Peter Purvis, the legend himself, Peter Purvis. Now, that, of course, is Peter from a still when he was playing our very own Stephen in William Hartnell's time in Doctor Who. Now, Purvis went on from Blue Peter to do some other stuff. And then in 1967, he joined the Blue Peter team. And he was there until March 1978. Okay. And, well, I think we all grew up with Peter, didn't we? Peter, John and Leslie, surely.
Yeah. Oh, definitely, yes. That's a beautiful shirt he's wearing there as well.
Yeah. And not only Peter, but Peter looked after Petra, who was sitting to his right in the picture you just showed there, whose bust was immortalised in the Blue Peter Garden for many years. I'm not sure when Television Centre was closed down if that was all moved.
It's now in Salford. Yeah, it's now in Salford in the.
Petra's bust was very much a centrepiece of the Blue Peter Garden, and there she is, there sitting next to Peter. And I just wonder at times, you know, I've never made the connection until now whether Petra was called after Peter, you know, because there's a nice little link there between the two names.
I don't know. We shall have to find out. But as we say, there was Peter doing very well on Blue Peter, and a whole generation of us grew up with him. And the Doctor Who link was exploited later on because fans of Blue Peter started to write into the show asking Peter, were you in Doctor Who? So, of course, on the show, I mean, the poor guy was plagued by Daleks from his very first moment there with Val and John on set, right through his career. Right through there he is with John Noakes and Leslie Judd, which is the team most of us will remember, I'm sure, because they were the mainstays of children's television throughout the entire 70s. But yeah, Peter, bless him, he got the lead. He had to talk about all the Doctor Who stories of the day. Oh, goodness me, including this one, which was a preempt, if you like, for Day of the Daleks in 1972, but it was actually on months before Day of the Daleks screened. And Blue Peter took the opportunity of knowing that, and they basically bigged up in their script about who knows when the Daleks can next be seen and all this sort of stuff, and started to tease stuff. But they are the Day of the Daleks, if you know what I mean.
They
They
are,
also
yes,
got
they are definitely.
Three of them.
Yeah, all three of them.
And
Yeah, there's three
That's the
there.
three of them. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the army of three.
Spot
Yeah.
them.
the thing about that was the lighting, and the lighting there obviously nicely lit up, but they had it very dark, darkly lit. It was quite scary to watch because Peter Purvis went onto that little dais where they all sit with Petra, and
Yeah.
the Daleks circulated. And these are our first memories of the Daleks. I mean, I never came across the Daleks until Day of the Daleks,
Yeah.
and so this was the first time you saw this kind of moving. You know.
So do you actually remember, Brendan? Do you actually remember this on Blue Peter?
Yeah, because it was because I remember it being introduced, because I think there's a little item before you see the Daleks circulating when they said, you know, he'd met the Daleks, I think as Stephen, you know, that kind of thing. Because he was always saying he was always having to say he was in it, because I think they scripted it.
That's right. Yeah.
But they had a kind of sun effect, I remember, and it was very dark. So there were sinister silhouettes going around the dais for a while until it was more lit up. And what an introduction. That was quite scary because, and I have to say, that's the only time I saw them. And I can't remember if the first time I saw Dave the Daleks later, though, they were back in black and white because we were in a caravan in Torquay. So I was watching through a tiny little set, the black and white version, when I'd seen the colour version a few months, you know, it was weird really, but was a good introduction and brilliant lighting to do that, because the thing about Blue Peter is they did blur sometimes reality with the programme. There were moments when, you know, like K9, we'll talk about later, would be in role and all the rest of it. And so the Daleks sometimes were in role and then they'd go out of role and explain things. So as a little 4-year-old, it was quite a blur, you know.
Well, I think it's great that you can actually remember that because I don't remember that. This was I think it was towards the end of 1971. So I would have been a little baby, but I do have vague recollections of this. Now, this was John Pertwee promoting and presenting to Blue Peter / Doctor Who fans the Whomobile. Again, there's Peter talking to him about it. They were pushing that link again, and why not? If you've got it, use it. And this, I mean, you remember this one as well, don't you, Time Muddler? Anybody else remember this?
Yes, I remember.
I remember this. Yeah.
You're constantly reminding us how old we're getting, JT. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
I mean, what was really weird was, I mean, it's fantastic to see the Whomobile, but I remember as a kid, I was shocked at seeing John Pertwee out of role in his normal attire, and it was kind of getting used to that. I found it, I mean, I was intrigued by him explaining in technical mumbo jig, but to see John Pertwee not in ruffles and not in the cape was a shock to me as a little kid, and actually seeing a normal person.
Yeah. But I think the reason why Pertwee does that is because he's very, very serious about this vehicle, which he's obviously played a hand in getting into the series. And he's not in character as the Doctor promoting this on Blue Peter. He's very much John Pertwee, the part owner of this thing, showing it off on television. And the surprising and quite enjoyable thing about this is how seriously he takes. It's almost as if, you know, when he talks about levitation buttons and all sorts going on, it's obviously genuinely that this thing can do what it's supposed to be able to do in the Doctor Who universe. So it's just very, very endearing. But you're quite right, Brendan. It's fascinating that it appears as himself in costume, but I think that's because he's claiming ownership. This is not Doctor Who's vehicle. This is John Pertwee's.
And Peter was really into vehicles as well, wasn't he? I mean, he did Top Gear later, but he liked the gadgetry too. I thought Peter Purvis, he was really into
30 years on, this would have been on Top Gear. Yeah.
It would have been. Yeah. What was fascinating about when they used to bring vehicles into the studio, I don't know if you guys remember this, but they used to open the huge BBC television dock doors and the trucks would come in.
On
I'd be amazed when they came in and they didn't bump into any of the set as they reversed in or whatever. It was great. And sometimes you saw bits in the studio behind the scenes flats and things. I remember one occasion a truck came in and there was a police box in the corner as they went past. I remember that and thinking, my God, there's the TARDIS. Wow.
Yeah.
It was great.
Well, saying that, Paul, the Day of the Daleks bit when we saw the spinning Daleks on that dais, one of the Daleks, when it was badly lit, hits the dais and does a hell of a whack, and it's a damaged Dalek going round after that.
Oh, I can imagine.
And Peter
that
Purvis has to jump out of the way for safety, doesn't he? Otherwise, get run over.
We need to point out to people that aren't aware, Blue Peter went out twice a week on a Monday and a Thursday as part of children's television before the grown-up news hit at 6 o'clock in the evening. And it was a huge success. I mean, this thing was pulling in 20 million viewers or more. And everybody, as I say, everybody in the United Kingdom knew Blue Peter. We still do know Blue Peter because it's still around. It's still on air now. And what was brilliant about it, it was live. It was broadcast live to the nation. So anything could go wrong. Anything could happen. As some of the presenters, whichever team you grew up with, would always occasionally point out, and you knew something that may not be going right at the time. The thing about this show is that anything could happen, or something. And it was brilliant and it was exciting because of that. I want to share one of. Go on.
No, and they helpfully told us how to burn our house down at Christmas as well, which was always good. So
yeah, well, that's true.
All of these sort of blooper shows now are forever showing clips of the Blue Peter studio. If it's not been set in fire, it's been covered in elephant dung. You know,
absolutely.
So that's
yeah, one of the morals of that was don't bring large pets into your household. That's a good
yeah, that's referring to a famous incident where they brought a baby elephant into the studio.
Lola.
I thought it was Lulu.
Oh, Lulu, you're right. It is Lulu.
Yeah, and she had the Call of Nature live on the show, which enthralled the children around. And then John Noakes slipped in the thing, and that was hilarious. It's very famous in the United. It's to this day you can see it on blooper TV shows because it's famous. Peter's saying you could get a double-decker bus through those doors, the huge doors of Television Centre Studio 1. They were massive. And guys, wasn't it a thrill always seeing something come through those doors? Do you remember?
They once had a Dalek car come through those doors.
Yes,
they did. Yeah, in the 90s, they had a Dalek car coming through, which again,
with Karen Keating, wasn't it? Karen Keating did
Karen Keating presented that. Yeah. So it was fantastic. I want to share with you one of my first proper memories of Doctor Who being on Blue Peter, and this actually inspired me to start making my own TARDIS console rooms for years. This was the work of Blue Peter and Doctor Who fan Jonathan Sellers, and it was broadcast on Blue Peter in March 1975. Now, Jonathan at the time was 16 years old and living just outside Oldham in northwest England. And I just remember, so I would have been 5, and I'd remember this vividly because I loved these models and I was so inspired. Now, that TARDIS set, that's the one that got me going, thinking I could do this. I can make my own TARDIS set. Now, Jonathan was a Blue Peter winner of a competition. And when they discovered they had these models, obviously they had to bring these models on. There's a rehearsal shot here. And you can see he made some extremely accurate Daleks. Absolutely gorgeous. And put them all in these sets. What a fantastic thing for him to do. And then I also remember them because at the time I didn't know this, but it's only part of the research that I found this out. Waiting to take them away after the show were the people that ran Pertwee, the Blackpool exhibition. And they took them away and put them in the Blackpool exhibition. And I actually remember seeing them in the Blackpool exhibition, but because I was so young, I didn't make the connection. You know, I thought they were from the actual show. Yeah?
Yeah, no, those were the same models that appeared on Blue Peter and were made basically by a fan. I mean, if you go back slightly before that, the original Designer Monster competition, where you had the Aquaman, the Hypnotron, and the Steel Octopus, they were put on display at the Boys and Girls exhibition in 1967-68. And that was the only place in the world that people would have seen those.
Well, now we've come to that. I just want to say, Jonathan, if you're watching, get in touch. Because I'd like to know what you were doing now, because apparently Jonathan's dream when he was 16 years old was to become a television set designer. I hope he achieved it. But he was 16 in 75. He'll be blah, blah, blah now. Get in touch with us. Let us know how your career panned out. We would like to know. And come and talk to us. That would be fantastic. But you mentioned the original Designer Monster competition. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that? I mean, none of us were around, so you might as well tell us.
I mean, I only remember it from having watched the 30 Years in the TARDIS.
Just like us,
yeah. I'm sure that's how you all came across it. But the the three monsters were on display after the competition. It wasn't quite like the later version where they appeared in the show, but you had Patrick Troughton, who, for the judging, as you can see there, appeared in costume. He must have been in studio and came down to judge some
I believe it was Fury
the
from the Deep that was in production at the time, Pertwee.
Okay, there we go. That makes sense. So Patrick Troughton was involved in picking the three winners from the three age categories they had.
I wonder why they didn't actually appear in the show. Let's say hello. Tardy Spider has joined us. Hello, Tardy Spider. He says he knows nothing of Blue Peter. Well, stay with us here because you'll know absolutely nothing more about it at the end of it. But we are appreciating this British legend. I can tell you, it is a British legend. What we got here? Oh, and then yes, so we've got this. This is the competition. So what happened here is children from all over the United Kingdom sent in their entries, and this was actually called a Beat the Daleks competition. That wouldn't be allowed today. It was 1967, and John Paul and the Time Muddler there sent in their entries with thousands and thousands of other children all around the country. And Patrick Troughton and the Blue Peter team, and I'm sure a couple of others, chose the winners. And this picture is really good because there's Patrick with one of the winners there on some big-eyed thing.
That was the Hypnotron.
Thank you.
Hypnotron,
and what
that's
did
right,
that do by any?
John Noakes famously described the Hypnotron as by gum, it can wink.
That's right, he did. Stay tuned. We're going to be talking about the legend that is John Noakes very, very soon on this show. But yeah,
Patrick
I mean, what?
I'm going to say Patrick Troughton didn't appear on TV because he was quite shy, obviously, didn't like publicity. So that was all done behind the scenes, wasn't it? He wasn't there in front of the camera the same way that Pertwee was earlier. He did it all behind the scenes, just photographs, nothing live on Blue Peter for Patrick, was there?
I know it was all photographs, but of course, the footage doesn't exist, and the research basically suggests that he might be there. I don't know, but I really don't know. But the kids got to meet him; they got to meet Doctor Who, and that's the most important thing. I mean, and of course, Mr. Troughton, you're right.
Tragically, Karen Dagg, who designed the Steel Octopus, I believe, she died tragically quite young.
Oh, bless her.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
wow.
believe someone discovered that recently. So, it's a real shame. Because again, I'd love to know, have those winners come on and speak to us and tell us their experiences of
that would be brilliant.
Yeah.
And what makes me laugh about these things as well is that they were all made up by the visual effects department. And this would have been like the competitions of today, which we'll come to through this show. This would have been huge at the time, and the BBC did get a lot of entries to this as well, showing how popular both Blue Peter and Doctor Who were back, all this way through. But what came through? I mean, you can obviously tell they're all cardboard and cheap stuff left over in the BBC spare department. Do you know what I mean? And this SFX.
It's quite surprising it did turn up in Doctor Who, isn't it?
Patrick Troughton actually did make a return to Blue Peter years later, 1984 to be precise, when he went on to publicise the Box of Delights, that classic children's TV drama, which I'm sure most Doctor Who fans will be aware of. If you are not, treat yourself, try and find the DVD version of the Box of Delights and watch it at Christmas. You cannot watch it any other time. It has to be Christmas. This is the law. It's the law.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Absolutely. But of course, because he was Patrick Troughton, Janet Ellis, who was the presenter at the time, also managed to bring in his role as the second Doctor. So again, another link. And he was absolutely delighted, having just appeared the year before in the Five Doctors, to talk about Doctor Who. So that was great. And it was lovely to see him there as well, wasn't it? I remember being thrilled that they were talking, A, about the Box of Delights, and B, then they went on to Doctor Who, which I wasn't expecting at all. Lots of memories here. You're watching Who's Views. It's a special show. We're celebrating that very special and now legendary relationship, which no other television shows have, between Blue Peter and Doctor Who, which has lasted since the show Doctor Who more or less hit it big in 1964. Another memory we've got here. So, who wants to explain this one?
Yes, I remember this one.
Yeah.
This was during a BBC strike, and I do remember this. And there's a shot of John Noakes. I'll get to in a minute. But there's a strike at the BBC, and they couldn't use the set, so they had to use the set from Robot. And they're in the doctor's lab there, and they used the Doctor's lab, and I think they used the bit in Robot when the robot tunnels through the ground to get to the disintegrator gun piece for the gun, and
That's right.
they're all using the set, and it's great. It's fantastic. But I think Peter Purvis comes out the TARDIS and says, "We didn't actually arrive here in the TARDIS," which I thought was wonderful. So we didn't think we had done, but anyway.
I think Peter Harrington in the chat has mentioned the ladder, and it's a well-known BBC demarcation dispute that led to the strike. And there was a step ladder, which actually appears in Robot itself, and the actors have to act around, which led to this. But infamously, one of the shots during the open title sequence, when the Blue Peter people are teasing their audience about where they are, there's a fabulous scene of John Noakes emerging bottom first from the hole in the ground.
Yep.
The giant robots attempt to get a disintegrator gun, and it's just hilarious. It's great when Blue, and John Noakes in particular, you say we'll talk about later on, just great sense of humour, and of all the sets they could have gone to present live from, they went to Doctor Who, and that was just a lovely mesh. It just made perfect sense. And for those of us who are fans at the time and was yet to see Tom Baker, we got our first glimpse of the fourth Doctor's first adventure and the sets going on there, which was an extra treat for us too. So
it really was. That's a real point to put on as well for anybody that wasn't there at the time. Doctor Who was in a break between Planet of Spiders and Robot, so they were filming Robot at the time that this strike happened, as John says. So they had to go on to another set, and it was a thrill for fans, because you suddenly went, look at all this, it's all new.
What really helps is it was the Doctor's lab where. Yeah, you've seen that for a few years with John Pertwee's Doctor, and obviously having seen the regeneration, that lab set immediately screams Doctor Who. The whole and the other robot stuff isn't quite gonna connect, but that set in particular, really brought fans. Oh yeah, I know where they are, and I think was it Shep jumps up onto the table?
Probably. Yeah. We're coming back to him in a minute. What I remember about this was the TARDIS, and then getting excited because, as you say, hilariously, John Noakes never did anything by the book, did he? He was always a character. He is a legend. And as you say, the opening shot of Blue Peter that episode was his bum coming out of this alleged hole. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing you know is that there's Peter coming out of the police box and all this. It was fantastic. And when I saw the TARDIS, that's when I went, oh, this is different. This is different. Absolutely brilliant. We've got a couple of comments here from Jamie wants to know, was it on twice a week in the afternoon? Yeah, it was on Mondays and Thursdays. Mondays and Thursday afternoons.
5:30.
5:30 or thereabouts. Just before
5:45,
yeah. And it was usually followed by a 5-minute thing like the Magic Roundabout or something like that to get used to those last 5 minutes, because it only ran for 25 minutes, although it's not bad for a show that started 15 minutes. So we got all that. That's where we go there. Yeah.
I remember it being Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It was on at 5:10.
It went 3 times a week.
Yeah.
When was that?
You watched that after News Round and then before Neighbours.
Oh, Neighbours, please. I see that's where we sort of pass out now, don't we? No, that wasn't for us.
I want you to lower the tone.
we turned over and watched Crossroads instead. That was
it. Oh, right. But this was the beauty of Blue Peter, and as you can see, it's a great affection from all ages to this very, very day. And one of the memories I really want to look at, and this has come from John himself. John, what's this?
Oh, this is one of the infamous Blue Peter mix. I think the lady was called Margaret Parnell.
Yes. Not the lady in the picture, that's Leslie Judd.
No, that's Leslie Judd, but the lady who devised what these Blue Peter makes was a lady called Margaret Parnell, and she was basically a genius. She taught children how to make something out of nothing, to quote an old EastEnders pop song, just basically how to create from odds and ends. And it literally isn't odds and ends, it's skipping about your kitchen cupboard. And one of the great things, it was just about the time, I think it's season 15, just when Leela had joined the TARDIS.
That's right.
We were in 1977.
Spring 1977, well done.
Yeah, Doctor Who Theatre. And basically the Doctor Who Theatre constituted of an old box, a crisp box. And you took it apart, assembled it. So you see the bases of the crisp box there, and then you use various different parts of that to create a proscenium arch, to create pillars on the side of this, and then within that you could create sets. One of the sets I do remember quite specifically was, and you can still get these today, those orange crates you get, the big sort of indented purple
Yes.
things, became TARDIS-like. You could actually reverse them from the interior of the TARDIS, or you could use them for the interior of some spaceship with a bit of magical tinfoil in the background too. And of course, it showed you how to make, as I say, the proscenium arch at the top, and then you can add in layers of different planets or TARDIS interiors. And if you bought the Radio Times and you were lucky enough to get that, as I was, they also gave you 2 little cutouts of the Doctor and Leela, which you were able to cut out and put onto little bits of wire, which you'd cut up your wire coat hanger, and you could slide the Doctor and Leela in and out of the action when you created your own little plays. And at the time, I had a game which was famous at the time called War of the Daleks. You spin a central thing, and the Daleks would move around this board. And I used my Daleks from War of the Daleks. It wasn't the same scale, but I used them as well as some of the Doctor Who figures and creatures that were in the Radio Times to create plays. Now, once I made this thing, I was able to hold on to it. It was quite sturdy. It held on to, it lasted about a year or more. And I was able to do this almost on a daily basis. I put on little shows for my cat, Tibbles, who would sit there peaceably and quite entertained as I conducted the latest adventure. I don't know, there's a scene in The Railway Children where the children gather around and entertain the young boy who's had broken his leg with a similar sort of setup. And the Doctor Who theatre was just like that. And that was one of the most memorable makes I think Blue Peter ever did. And was the most nostalgic and memorable, and had the most impact in my life.
Well, did you know, John, that you were not alone, because this is the spring of 1977. Blue Peter is a huge program. They had 35,000 letters asking for those. These are the instructions on how to make the Blue Peter theatre, including the bits. So as you can see, that there's the purple things on the right hand side there. They're the things that the fruit used to go in that John was describing. The back there, in case you can't make it out because these are archive pictures, the back there is crumpled tinfoil put onto a piece of cardboard which is slid into the top, and then these are the figures from the Radio Times. Now, I couldn't find the Radio Times originals, so these are courtesy of Panini from a Doctor Who magazine from a few years back. Well, in fact, quite a lot of years back, but they're the ones you put on the wire. And yet, so, I mean, 35,000 requested leaflets to the BBC office.
I was one of those as well.
They hit well, yeah, because that was the zeitgeist at the time. I mean, I had the Shadow Muppet Show kind of theatre. I had an Oliver Twist one, which was all cardboard cut out, which linked with John's one, where you just got the Leela and the Tom Baker. And then you thought, could I make some jazzy sets to mix with Oliver Twist's characters? And, what did kids do on the night then? That's what we did.
That's what we did.
Cardboard cutouts. We'd had the Weetabix packets. We'd been spoilt with the Asterix ones and the Doctor Who ones. And so this was building on that thirst that kids had then for just cardboard, and just, but to have the actual designs done for you. And then, of course, to have the ingenuity, like you say. What was the name of that lady, John?
Margaret Parnell.
Parnell.
Because the creativity sometimes, and it was always a used up toilet roll, this, that, and the other, but the genius to make it sci-fi. But yeah, I remember I never had to make the theatre because I had the Oliver Twist theatre, but I mixed Oliver Twist with Doctor Who. That's how I did it. But yeah, I think we all did it, didn't we?
We did.
You did historical adventures, Brendan, as well then.
Of course.
But this is the classy thing about Blue Peter. They could have just had to make about a theatre making a theatre, but they made it a Doctor Who theatre. They knew their audience, they knew who would get the best use out of this sort of thing, because I'll be honest with you, had Blue Peter made a theatre, I would have looked at it, thought very nice, maybe clock that for a rainy day, perhaps. But the fact that they made a Doctor Who theatre, made it a must for me to do. An absolute must for me to do. Because for those kiddie winkles watching today, we didn't have videos, we didn't have computer games, we had nothing. We had to make our own entertainment, until the
We
lights
had
went
cardboard, John, and we were proud of it.
Yes, we did. Yes, I mean, and even cardboard. It was hard to come by in the days.
Well, but I actually remember being able to go into Fine Fair or any of the Tesco or any of the supermarkets of the day and bring home, and much to the dismay of my poor mother, massive cardboard boxes all the time, and she's like, "What are you doing now?" and doing things for speed. The brilliant thing about Blue Peter, for anyone watching, is that, like Doctor Who, it is and has become part of British television culture. So in Doctor Who, of course, Doctor Who has given the world "it's bigger on the inside" as a phrase, but Blue Peter can come on the same parallel with that, because everything on Blue Peter is done either for speed, or we've got the infamous use of sticky-backed plastic, which you're probably not allowed to use anymore, come to think of it, and the legendary, here's one I made earlier. And that was done all the time. And it's part of our culture now to say this. I mean, this show is just as iconic. It is up there with The Doctor. And it's no secret, of course, that they are the two longest running BBC shows in their various formats, both now produced by BBC Studios, but they are still there on the channels. And that's just amazing for both of them to get through. I mean, it is great. I mean, this is what we did. You're absolutely right, John. This is what we did. I mean, we had nothing else to do. We had 3 channels at a certain time of night. I don't know about you lot, but at a certain time of night, you weren't really interested in stuff that came onto the television. I'd say from about 6 o'clock onwards, really, to be honest. Wasn't really interested in the 6 o'clock news or Nationwide. So you would make stuff that you'd seen. I spent ages making Janet Ellis's Blake 7 Scorpio bracelets. I had them for years. They were so easy, but it was all those sort of things that came into it.
I remember slightly later, but when they made Tracy Island.
Yes,
huge one, wasn't it?
Because that was the big toy of the time. Because Thunderbirds was back on screens on BBC Two, probably after Blue Peter, and everyone wanted to make that, and they had to bring out a video of it because
and the leaflets.
All the leaflets that was requested again would have been massive numbers, and that's what we did. You made stuff, and Blue Peter was brilliant in identifying what their audience were interested in, and that's why they used Doctor Who so much.
And I think they still are.
What was really good about Blue Peter, for those who maybe are watching from abroad as well, was we're talking about anything. A toilet roll holder, toilet rolls. We're talking about bits of cardboard, bits of plastic, and really we were like the Wombles of our time. We were just told to just hold on to everything. Get your mum's washing up liquid bottle, get her to empty it and give it to you so that you could make a spaceship. And we were making stuff like that. I remember when it was Easter and you got all the Easter eggs and you used all the cardboard then, because there could be platforms and everything. We were used to that. So Blue Peter kind of tapped into that. We just wanted bits of cardboard.
Well, times were tough, weren't they? And Blue Peter helped you to make your own Mother's Day cards, your Easter cards. Remember the Easter card they made where they used the egg cup from the cardboard eggs, the eggs come in, the boxes, and you painted it yellow and stuck it on a card and then painted a daisy type shape behind it to make it look like a daffodil. I was doing that for years. In fact, I was doing it until I was about 35 years old because I'm cheap. We have to now come to, of course, the legends. And Blue Peter has given us many legends, but for our generation, there is a standout. There are 2 standout legends, and it's these 2. John Noakes and his beloved dog, Shep. Goodness me. The memories we could talk about John. I mean, this guy, you would not allow him to do what he did. I mean, I remember him climbing to the top of Trafalgar, Nelson's Column in Trafalgar Square on a ladder. On a ladder. A ladder. I don't even think if he had a helmet on.
No,
just to clean the bloody column. I mean, that can you imagine? They fly them in with a bloody helicopter now, an elastic, and
didn't they nearly all drown in Hawaii as well? There was an incident with John Noakes and that. Where,
John and Peter.
They kept trying to kill him.
They did the very best, didn't they?
I find it difficult to watch the Nelson's Column one up there because I suffer a bit from versatile myself. So how John Noakes cope with this at all? Because to watch it, because there's a camera strapped to the man's back or whatever, I don't know how they filmed it, but it's terrifying. He's literally teetering at the top of this thing, you know, and one false move and it's goodbye Noakesy. It
Yeah.
really is. Oh,
And he did the parachute thing as well. Do you remember?
yes.
Yeah.
Again, they recycled, if you like, years later when Janet Ellis did it, and she did it brilliantly as well. And I think they've done it since then as well with one of the latter lot from After Our Time. I think they've done it again. But it's a great film to put somebody there and throw them out of a plane. The kids love that. It doesn't matter what generation it is; they love all that. But this, I mean, what we're getting to here is the link with Doctor Who, because these two. I don't know what to say about Noakesy and Shep, because they were a comedy duo. I mean, that dog's timing with John was perfect, and John's Yorkshire humour and his ability. I mean, you know, Jamie was saying that the Get Down Shep became a song which was in the top 10 at one point.
Baron Knights, the Baron Knights, was it?
Baron Knights, yes.
The Baron Knights, yes, I remember that. Yeah.
It was in the top 10. It's absolutely outrageous. But the famous thing about these two was, and we have to go back now to October 1977, when they were talking about the longest multicolored scarf in the country at the time. It was 417 feet in length. And that, of course, was a great way for them to bring in Doctor Who again. Mm-hmm. And who was introduced as a companion in that particular part of 1977? Well, it was K9. Yeah, it was K9. The problem is that our beloved Shep here, and this is famous now, this is in television history, but our beloved Shep didn't take to our beloved K9 and attacked him.
Fabulous.
Do you remember this, guys?
I remember this. It's brilliant. It's so funny. I've got two dogs and they do the exact same thing. And they're both collies. And it's wonderful watching Shep attack K9. And it's so funny. They're trying to control and wrangle Shep around the studio. It's brilliant.
Or you have to feel the special effects guys back, you know, off camera, behind the cameras, must have been absolutely livid. Get the dog off, because this thing, as we know, costs a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And then here comes Shep. I'm having you.
Bless John Leeson. He's ad-libbing away perfectly too.
He is. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But you know, I mean, this was classic television. This was live on children's television, and here comes Shep. And he really went for K9, and poor John is desperately trying to stop him. Leslie Judd has to come in and rescue K9 by grabbing Shep. Shep, no, don't go off with him. You'll go to another planet. So brilliantly on the ad lib, it really was. But I remember being a mix of horrified and B, pissing myself laughing, quite frankly. Just thinking, oh my god! But I was horrified that our brand new robot dog.
Yeah, why did you shoot it?
But it was magical at the time. Do you remember, guys? Just Jordan here is saying Shep obviously didn't like the competition. Well, Shep was a star. Shep and Petra were beloved stars of Blue Peter. They really were. In fact, when Petra died, and even when Shep died years later, they both made the front pages of the tabloids.
You have to remember the whole idea behind the Blue Peter pets. They had cats as well, Jason, the Siamese cat, Jack and Jill. But the whole idea behind the Blue Peter pets, it was Billy Baxter was very clever about this too, was that for children who lived in high-rise accommodation and in children's homes and all that and didn't have pets, these were meant to associate them with the idea of keeping pets that they could regularly see and be informed of their upkeep and their growth and all the rest of it. And also, the good thing about pets for children is to teach them about bereavement ultimately, you know, because that's how children initially experience bereavement, is probably through the death of a pet too. And interesting, JT, when you mentioned the legend that is John Noakes and Shep, I remember years later, there was a Sunday afternoon programme hosted by Bill Oddie, and John Noakes was a guest on it, and he announced the death of Shep. It was live show, and he was in pieces. You know, the man was genuinely lost at the death of his chum. I now I have dogs myself. I absolutely understand. And
Oh, totally. Yeah.
They thought BBC got it big enough that not only did the press announce it the next day, but they got John on to let everybody know that Shep had passed. That's how big he was for a generation of kids.
They were stars. They were all stars. Yeah. Whether it was Joey the parrot, George the tortoise. We've got Jack here. Hiya, Jack. He says animals on Blue Peter were always entertaining. They were. In you know, what was one of the tortoises Frida? Yes, although years later it turned out to be Fred. Very topical in these days. Yeah.
Well, you may not remember now. There were two tortoises at one point. I wonder if you get the connection here. They were called Maggie and
Maggie
Jim.
and Jim.
Do you know
Yeah,
why?
If you
they're
do
called
know this
Maggie and
connection,
Jim?
let us know.
Why
Maggie
are
and
they called Maggie and Jim? Go on.
I remember that. That was brilliant. What's TARDIS Spider here saying? He's saying, sounds like the connection between show and audience was real and not a perform. Oh, it was totally real.
Oh yeah.
The Blue
Yeah.
Peter office to this day, whereas we all wrote in, they now email in, which I still think is brilliant. The kids email and text into Blue Peter now, which is brilliant. And it was, I mean, that's how they kept in touch with their audience. That's what half the content of Blue Peter was suggested by its audience, TARDIS Spider. You know, I also want to say hello here as well, because we've got a new watcher with us today. It's Leah. Hello, Leah. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. Do you know what Blue Peter is? If not, hopefully we're educating you on this very special Who's Views. It's nice to see everybody in the chat as well.
Something? I was going to say, can I say something was about Shep? Oh, thanks. Right. Okay, I'll get my coat. It's fine. But it's about Shep, because a little memory I have. It goes back. So yeah, it goes back to the Day of the Daleks clip we were talking about with the three Daleks. At the end of that is a fantastic shot, and this is all due to the fantastic extras on the DVDs. It's a great shot of John Noakes with Shep, and Shep's a little puppy. It's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. Look out for that one, cracker.
Peter here is asking, he wonders if those letters are archived. In my experience, yes. There was a rule in our days in Blue Peter that Biddy Baxter, the editor, now Biddy Baxter, for more on Biddy Baxter, go and look at our Merchandise Paradise playlist and our interview with Richard Marson, because he's also not just a Doctor Who fan, but he was editor of Blue Peter in the 90s, and we'll come to him shortly. But he can tell you a lot about Biddy in that particular show. But she was a formidable, everybody in the country knew the name Biddy Baxter, because she ran Blue Peter for over 20 years with a rod of iron, but always got it right. You have to give her that in a man's world of television as it was then. But she had so much common sense. And one of her rules in Blue Peter was that every letter that young people wrote in would be filed, so that when the young person wrote in again, they were recognized. So I have loads of letters from Blue Peter from the 70s over there. And each one says, hello, Justin, or dear Justin, lovely to hear from you again. And then it goes on to address whatever nonsense I'd written to them about before. But apparently, in my experience again, that's exactly the same again, because a few weeks ago, I emailed the BBC's Blue Peter production office down in Salford Quays at Media City and said, hello, I wonder if this system still works. My name is Justin Thomas and I am now 53. And years ago, I wrote to you suggesting you make a Doctor Who TARDIS control room. Delighted to see that my idea has been featured twice in Blue Peter over the last few years. Can I have a Blue Peter Doctor Who 60th anniversary badge? The email comes back, dear Justin, lovely to hear from you again after all these years. No, you can't. No. So yeah. But it's still there, Pete. They still do, and I just thought that was so funny. I loved that. Thank you so much to the current production team for getting back to me. I really appreciate it. I sent them an email on a weekend and it was with me Monday morning. And it still looks like Biddy's model is still going, not just on camera, but off the camera as well. And congratulations, guys. That is just absolutely fantastic.
It's credit to Biddy Baxter and her desire to archive stuff that we still have clips from Doctor Who. Because Blue Peter episodes were saved. And they featured clips from certain episodes. Okay, maybe we can include the first regeneration in that, but if Blue Peter hadn't bothered it, maybe we'd have all of episode 4. Who knows?
Well, who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, clips like that, which would have been lost had Blue Peter not used them and included them. Bits from, as you say, Peter Purvis when they were showing bits of Dalek Master Plan and stuff like that. You know, we wouldn't have those without Blue Peter and Biddy Baxter.
I mean, it's no secret here. But Pertwee was watching. Sorry, Brendan. But Pertwee watched Doctor Who. Blue Peter. He came to that after us. But for I mean, can I just ask you at this point, Pertwee, was it still a thrill for you when you saw something about Doctor Who coming onto Blue Peter? Because for us, it was. You immediately. I mean, we always sat down in front of Blue Peter anyway, but you were faster down. You know, if the TARDIS suddenly appeared at the beginning of the show, or the Daleks, wouldn't you agree, Brendan?
Oh God, yeah, and I remember the relationship between Blue Peter and Doctor Who was special in the 70s also, because that was the only guarantee of any clips. There's no video, there's no nothing, there's no YouTube. Yeah. And so the only time you would ever see a clip of Doctor Who would be on Blue Peter. Now, you see, that was echoed a lot later with the new series on Graham Norton or Jonathan Ross. They'd kind of, try and do a trailer for the series, and they tried to build a relationship. But it was Blue Peter, particularly in the 70s and 80s, that really did the clips. Always went over. I mean, there's a good YouTube clip somewhere where it shows you how they redid some of their scripts, didn't they? Where basically, if they introduced the Daleks, say, in the 70s, they did it again in the 80s, or they explained regeneration, and they'd do it again and again, decade after. It almost didn't change the script, but it was just a different presenter and the same clip. But you were guaranteed clips. And remember, in those days, that was gold dust.
Yeah, we didn't get the clips like that. But when you were watching in the 90s, did you get the same thrill as we did if a Doctor Who item? I mean, we're going to come to one of your memories shortly about that. But did you get that thrill?
I mean, obviously, when I'm watching Blue Peter, it's more in the 90s era where Doctor Who was far less frequent. Inclusion for Blue Peter. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, Blue Peter was something you watched anyway. If there was Doctor Who on it, it was the bonus.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And it's the same today, guys. I mean, I've got friends who have got children, strangely. And, it's a case there where their kids love Blue Peter on a Friday afternoon. They love it. And it's so lovely. We're going to come to that very shortly. Let's go back to K9 very quickly, because that one where he was tapped by Bad Dog Shep. Bad Dog Shep, bad. Was the first appearance. It didn't put him off. K9 actually came back. He must have been getting a good fee, because years later, a couple of years later, in 1970, wherever it is, I've lost my notes. But here we go. He came back to meet Tina Heath. Tina Heath was talking about this little remote control K9, which you can see there. And obviously K9 was brought in to talk about it. And I wish I could find my notes on this, because I wanted to. He
was traumatized by the experience, JT, because his voice has changed by this appearance.
This is David Brearley, isn't it?
Yes,
that's right. Yeah. So.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I can't. I've got so many notes for this show, and I can't find who that was. So I do apologise, but this is somebody's model of. Oh, here it is. I've put it under Baby K9. This was by 15-year-old Mark Farrington in 1979. And as you can see there, this is on a lead. It was a remote control. Well, not exactly remote control. It was all generated from this handheld box, and it spoke as well, and it moved. So really, really early remote control type things. Really, do any of you guys remember that one?
Vaguely,
yeah.
I was just wondering if there was a Mrs. K9 and
the thought.
K9 and Co before its time. Who knows?
Oh,
was this going to be the Scrappy Doo of the K9?
He's a bit Scrappy Doo. That's true. Yeah.
The brilliant thing about K9, he was a good sport, considering that Shep tried to kill him, because not only did he meet with Tina Heath, but he came back as part of another Doctor Who connection. From the Horns of Nymon to Blue Peter was, of course, Janet Ellis. She started. She joined Blue Peter in 1983, and as ever, Blue Peter was there to represent both shows and show the link, because Janet, as we know, that she is pictured there in the Horns of Nymon. But on her press day, when she was launched to the press, they wheeled K9 out again, and there he is. That's obviously the dummy K9 with Goldie, who was the dog at the time, who seemed to take to him. She didn't really mind him, as you can see there. She's quite bored.
Mm-hmm.
And Janet Ellis was there, but that was another example of this. And Janet stayed for the show for quite a while after. I think she was on it for 5 years. Mm-hmm. But wow, again, and that wasn't the only time. That wasn't the only time that K9 was on Blue Peter, and we'll come to that a bit later on. Any of you guys remember this?
Oh yes.
Go on then. What's this?
This is Peter Davison, kind of been announced as the new Doctor. But I do vaguely remember Sarah Green's just off camera there, off picture, and she gets Peter to read a letter about bring back K9 to try and save K9, because K9 was leaving at the time. So I remember that. Yeah. So am I right? Do you get any points?
You are absolutely right. You are absolutely right. And I remember watching this agog. I don't know about you guys, but this is it. This is 1980, and Peter has just been announced as the 5th Doctor Who. And yeah, you're right. It was Sarah Green, who, of course, Then a few years later was in Attack of the Cybermen as a Cryon. There's another link into Doctor Who. For more information on that, go and watch our Who's Views reviews on Attack of the Cybermen on the Who's Views reviews playlist. It's all planned, this, you know. It's not but yeah, and he was there, and he did that letter. He wrote, I thought he wasn't very comfortable on Blue Peter, was he? I mean, it shows how private Peter was back then as a younger man. He was sort of, you know, he wasn't in character. He wasn't sure where he was going. I think he was still a bit bewildered that he was coming into Doctor Who. And this is about the time, of course, that they had announced that he was going to be taking over from Tom. And it no offense, Peter, but it showed.
Yeah, you had to feel for Peter Davison. This is very much in at the deep end, you know, taking over this part, having to become the face of this part even before he's appeared on screen, if you like, and being asked, certainly by younger viewers, about the future of K9, which they were all concerned about, and him, who didn't want K9 anywhere near the programme, just like Johnny didn't have this gritted teeth, you know, for fear of upsetting the audience he's just about to try and court a few short months later, you know, so he's having to tread the line. But interestingly, you notice that Peter does get much, much better at this as we see successful appearances, whether it's on Blue Peter or other shows. He learns, and he's very much, and now today he's very much a wit and a raconteur, and someone we look forward to listening to greatly.
JT, is this the same one that covers the 5 faces as well, or am I misremembering?
No, that's the second one. I just want to say that nice plug, that, JT. Yes, it's not bad here, just Jordan, is it? Yes, we've got all that. And Peter Harrington says, is Ku Stark mentioned, JT? That's in our Who's Views reviews of Attack of the Cybermen. Available now on the playlist. Yes, she is. We're not frightened of that. We do talk about all that. Absolutely. So go back and have a look if you haven't seen it. But no, because what happened... Also, actually, Pertwee, just to let you know, just in case, because you are obviously our exhibitions person, having written a book available now from Telos. In 1980, Tina Heath visited the Longleat Doctor Who exhibition. And they did a film about that, in which she was pretending to spring clean as the exhibition wound down from one set of exhibits to another. Tried not to get the TARDIS moving with the infamous console that they had there. And it was actually the first on-screen appearance of John Nathan Turner as the producer, who actually teased some of the stuff from what would become season 18. He was big about that, you know. Go and look at it. It's on YouTube.
He did.
It's lovely. It's lovely one.
He was still being very much the stay tuned and JNT, because essentially he talks about some interesting flying creatures, which turns out to be bats.
He's brilliant. I mean, if we were older enough at that point, we would have known what was coming over the next 10 years, wouldn't we? Because he was just, I mean, that's when we saw he was really good. You mentioned there, Paul, the 5 Faces feature. This came after Peter Davison was presented as the 5th Doctor Who. And then in 1981, both Sarah Green and Simon Groom on Blue Peter did a whole feature which publicised the 5 Faces, the infamous 5 Faces of Doctor Who season that we were getting, which was starting that very week. And that's, of course, started with Unearthly Child, and it went through all those classics. And we all know about the 5 Faces of Doctor Who. It was a wonderful season, and a whole load of us got to see, for the first time ever, William Hartnell, Patrick Troughton, and John Pertwee right up to Tom. And unfortunately, there's not that many pictures of Sarah and Simon presenting it, because all they did was read the script to camera, and they had excerpts on Blue Peter from the various stories they were talking about. But what they did have, that set the scene for 1983. 1983, we've talked about it before. What a year 1983 was for a Doctor Who fan, the 20th anniversary of Doctor Who. For all of us on the panel, apart from Bedouin, it still seems like yesterday, 1983, because it was such a big, fabulous, celebratory year. Every moment of that is ingrained in our head. The 20th anniversary season, Longleat, the Blackpool exhibition, the Longleat exhibition, the 5 Doctors, all the shows that, especially the BBC shows that were putting this through, the Radio Times cover. So much going on there, and Blue Peter got on board with that because they publicised the 5 Doctors. Now, guys, this was a big one. Who remembers this?
Well, they went through those. I mean, I remember them introducing each of the monsters, and you got a nice clip as well. It was all great for your clips and having your video recorder.
It
Definitely,
was so
yes.
exciting, wasn't it?
Yeah, you got a Sea Devil. You got, what was it? You got a Claws of Axos.
A
You
Krull.
went through, yeah, you got. But then they showed you the Raston Warrior robot. You got a teaser for the Five Faces. Not Five Faces. The Five Doctors itself. Yeah. And that's where Blue Peter really does work, because not only were they doing a recap on all the monsters that have been in the past and made a hit, but they suddenly give you a snippet. I think it was Simon Groom who introduced it, of the Raston Warrior robot, and suddenly you saw this new. I mean, I have to say, I think the Raston Warrior robot is underused. It should be.
Yeah, you pure fancy him, don't you?
Yeah. He's fantastic.
He's quite fit. I have to say that he is. So.
I wouldn't. But we talk about that in our Five Doctors reviews on the Who's Views reviews playlist.
Yes, imagine.
Shock horror. It's over there on that one if you want to have a go and look at that one. But this was brilliant. I mean, Doctor Who fans of a certain age. I was 13 in 1983. No secret about that. But my God, we squealed in delight, because not only that, but look who turned up.
Yay.
Doctor 5 and Doctor 1 turned up.
Greetings to you from the time.
Doctor 1.5, you mean? Doctor 1.5.
Well, they called him Doctor 1, didn't they? Which was fine, because they didn't want to confuse their issue. But it is Richard Herndl. And he and Peter Davison turned up in this Variety Club van, which was actually a gift. The Variety Club Sunshine Coach, which was going to a what we usually called, I don't know if we're allowed to say it now, but I'm going to say it anyway. Back in the day, we would call this, handicapped children. I suppose it's special needs now, in a school in the East End, and that's where it was donated to. I wonder where it is today. I have no idea. But that was, again, it was a huge part of Blue Peter, the Five Doctors, that particular edition.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Brendan was saying.
Oh, sorry.
Like Brendan was going to say, I was saying about the video recording all the clips and stuff. Did everyone here have a special tape just to put it into recording anything that you thought would be Doctor Who related?
Yes.
And the music started and you heard the theme, and then you ran for the tape, and then you recorded the fantastic program. Carry on, Brendan. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you did it with Breakfast Time with Frank Buff and Selena Scott. If they had Nicola Bryant as the new companion, they showed you all the companions. You had your VHS ready all the blooming time. You couldn't go to school. But I do remember when you got Richard Herndl and you got Peter Davison. And like I said earlier, with Blue Peter and Doctor Who, we had the blurring of the reality, their actors, and then their parts, because they had a little tried and tested line, didn't they, that they'd rehearsed, where, you know, who's the original Doctor, or something like that, and then me. And of course, it gave Richard, it was our first insight into Richard Herndl, of course, as well.
Yes, because we'd never seen him before.
No, so you actually thought, oh, does he come across as strong? Because now we were all, even though we were kids, we're all experts, having seen the Five Faces on how William Hartnell should be. So now we were the bee's knees on this. So no, he came across as strong enough then, didn't he? And I thought, oh, this is all exciting. And I just thought that was a lovely item. It reminded me of an earlier item on Blue Peter when they mentioned some Doctor Who exhibition, and they had, you know, fairly worn characters, you know, the costumes of the monsters, and they show you them, because I think the Krull in this had no eyes. The Sea Devil looked knackered. But you didn't care because they moved a little bit. Peter Duncan fluffed his lines, I do recall, when he was describing the history of one of them. And but you see, we all know this, don't we, JT? Because we videoed it so much and played it to death. That, we know every line that the presenters did.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if this is that on any of the DVDs.
It is. It's on the Five Doctors one, I think. Yeah. What's interesting about it is, we not knowing in hindsight now, we had a preview of the Daleks from Resurrection there as well, which is lovely.
Yes, because the Daleks hadn't been seen on that point at all. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Because if you look at them there, let me just find the picture. I'll get the close up. There is the Resurrection Dalek, because of course they were in studio just around about this time doing Resurrection of the Daleks, because it was 1983 and they were filming season 21. So all very exciting stuff. It was brilliant. I like, keep all the comments coming in, everybody. Nice to see you all. Very, very welcome. It's great to see everybody here. Hello to you all. Charlie Spider saying that there. Peter's saying, who needed sweets back then? Any Doctor Who bits made you... Yeah, great. And Sam's here as well. Hi, Sam. The Thinking is also here as well. Sam saying, that's what I did. Normal 3-hour VHS tapes always had 7 episodes and a bit of room for something like Blue Peter or Nationwide. I think we were all the same, Sam. I've still got them. I've got nothing to play them on. Nothing to play them on. There's another still here. Peter's mentioning Nationwide here. Didn't have the same bond with Blue Peter, but it did its bit in 1983. But it was brilliant.
Sorry, JT. This is why I'm going to give a tip of the hat to the restoration team who make the Blu-rays, because we all thought that having lost our own ability to play these tapes, because we don't have cassette recorders anymore, for them to go onto the DVDs and now onto the Blu-rays and to be added to with extra stuff means we've now got them for posterity. So tip of the hat to those guys in the Blu-ray team for doing that, because a lot of the stuff we had sat diligently and recorded, and because of that, a lot of these clips that are used now are made available to them to use themselves on the Blu-rays. We can all now share and have. So thank you.
Totally right. Yeah, well said, well said. Pete's asking, he's saying, I hope there's some BP on the new Blu-ray. There's bound to be.
Yeah.
There must be. I mean, I know they've done the special features before, which we mentioned on the DVDs, but they can put that back on. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. We've got here as well. Hello to the Doctor 14 Blu-ray reviews. Hello. Nice to see you. Welcome to Who's Views. Lovely to see you. Lovely glove. Nice jewelry. So we've got all that going on there. That's fantastic. Right. So where are we up to? The 80s took off. We had that fantastic edition for the 5 Doctors where the nation's kids were just enthralled. And that certainly helped us all to return a few days later for Doctor Who, the 5 Doctors, which was broadcast here, of course, on the 25th of November, 1983. Yes, we're still sore and we're still talking about it all these years later. But yes, so that happened there. But what happened in 1984, guys? And it suddenly became a Blue Peter tradition to do this after the first one. In 1984, we got a new Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And there he is.
Cat, didn't he? He really got on with the cat, I do remember in this one.
Jack. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, Colin appeared, as you can see, in costume here to chat to Janet Ellis, again, exploiting that link between Blue Peter and Doctor Who. And he was talking about how he wanted to play the role, how he came up with why the cat badge was there. Yes, he did a bit of jiggery-pokery with Jack. And the thing about Jack was the two cats, Jack and Jill, were famous in Britain for not being able to sit still. And when they were supposed to be on camera, they were never on camera. Even when they were talking about them, they would just run off and go and sit in their cat boxes, wouldn't they? I mean, it was famous, and children, we all loved that because you very rarely got to see it. But when Colin arrived, he grabbed hold of him, being a cat man, sat him on his lap, and Jack's purring away contently. The only guest on Blue Peter that could control the cat.
I think he is holding on very tightly, though, JT.
It doesn't matter. He still goes down in history as the guy that tamed Jack. Absolutely, there he is there. So that was it. But this interview was cracking because Colin was so at ease, confident, understood what Doctor Who was, understood the relationship between Doctor Who and Blue Peter, had a great rapport going with Janet here. Obviously, they were getting on very well. And then he gave away a gastropod egg.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes.
Fantastic. And that set us all up for what was to be the twin dilemma. And that was great. So, I mean, again, 1984, Blue Peter was there with just that simple thing of saying, hey, everybody, we've got the new Doctor Who, and we're going to chat to him. And wasn't that fantastic?
And notice the difference between Baker and Davison there. Baker's very much showing what Colin is. He's very much an upfront salesman of a guy. So he'll appear there in costume, more than comfortable on the chatting couch there with Janet Ellis in a way that Peter Davison took time to grow into. So that's the difference between these two actors. It took Peter a little while, but Troughton-esque, if you like, to grow into that role, whereas Colin was doing that from the word go. And I think that part of the role, the sort of Blue Peter appearances and all the rest of it, was very much ingrained into Colin. I think that's something about the role he relished and looked forward to. The advertising and the representation and the being the front face of the whole franchise. Except in those days, it wasn't a franchise; it was just plain old Doctor Who.
Well, that's exactly it. Yeah, go on, Paul.
It was great ambassador for the show, Colin. And we've said that in the 80th birthday celebration video. Where can we find that, JT?
It's in the playlist on the specials.
Okay.
Is it?
Oh, right.
It is, yes. Playlist on the special. See, we're trying to get into the Blue Peter mode here as well with our presenting, because this is what would happen. They never talked down to children, but they made everything made sense. I never once, through all the teams I had, and I went from Leslie John and Peter Purvis to Simon Groom, Janet Ellis, and Peter Duncan. So that's quite a long time. And I sort of started to phase out of it around about that time. I was aware when Simon Groom left, but I didn't see Mark Curry come in, if you know what I mean. You know, there was all that going on. And it was about this time that I was sort of becoming a sort of teenager and getting more into the music and smash hits and all that. But there was one thing I came back for. And this is one of your memories as well, Paul, isn't it?
Yes, I know what you're talking
1986,
about, yes.
Blue Peter was there again to welcome back Doctor Who after the infamous hiatus of 1985 into 86. And they again did Doctor Who fans proud with a massive feature on the trial of a Time Lord, which actually went into 3 of the 4 stories and promoted the hell out of it. This was a joy. You know, this was again Blue Peter being there for Doctor Who. This
was wonderful, JT. This was really good. I remember seeing this when it came on, and it covered the story so extensively. You can see there's Drathro and the L1, and then wonderful Nabil Shaban as Syl.
Do you remember the link between Janet Ellis and the L1?
Yes, I do. Her dad was an effects man on the series, and he's operating the L1. Is that right from memory? Is that correct? I think
that's right.
Janet Ellis's dad up there for Mike, thinking, down there for dancing. That's
it. Janet Ellis's dad was Mike Ellis, who worked in the BBC as a special effects advisor, and he actually drove the L1 robot. So again, another Blue Peter. That was the BBC back in the day. Everybody was in the same blooming building. You know, it was great. And come on to Blue Peter and show us how you do this. And it was actually really it was Janet talking to him like a dad, but you know,
it was a lovely moment. It helps him out. Are you in there, Pa? And it's just it's really nice. And that was kind of the thing you felt with the BBC, was it was very much a family. Obviously, they had a specific connection, but even amongst the presenters that you had on Blue Peter, you felt that they'd become almost part of your family because you'd see them twice, 3 times a week. It was.
And everybody worked on all the shows in those days. So as we know, designers were on all BBC shows, makeup was on all BBC shows. You met everybody in the BBC, the infamous BBC canteen or in the garden, having your lunch or what have you. Everybody knew, and it came through on Blue Peter as well, didn't it? And this one for the Trial of a Time Lord, this was magical. Of course, we've got there as well the delight that is Nabil. And he was interviewed partly as Syl with the Marsh Minnows, which Peter Duncan Peter Duncan was very, very wary of, but he tried one. Tastes suspiciously like peaches. Correct, says Syl, and then reverts into being Nabil. Now, again, Blue Peter was bang on the knuckle here because they didn't shy away from Nabil and his disability. And so what they spoke about, they actually asked, how's work? And it was a very honest, and Blue Peter was always honest. It didn't shy away from these subjects. It didn't shy away from the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Nothing. It was there speaking to children the way they needed to be spoken to. Because I have to say, I hadn't read anything or heard anything about Nabil from Vengeance on Varos to this moment, talking about his career, you know, or how difficult was it for Get Work. I was 16 at this point, and I thought this is really interesting. He didn't get as much as I understand why. I would have liked a little bit more of him talking about this, but big up Blue Peter for not shying away from the fact of this is who you are. Tell us about it.
It's quite a long section of the program in general for Doctor Who, isn't it? It's quite a large chunk of that episode of Blue Peter. Later, you've got is it Colin and Bonnie later on coming in towards the end of it?
Well, yeah, because Janet discovers the TARDIS, doesn't she? Yeah. And inside, of course, is the actual Doctor, the 6th Doctor with a beard. And I love Colin here because he basically says he's come back to Earth because the Earth have the best barbers. And it's the first appearance on anything of Bonnie in costume, explaining who Mel is, with Mark Curry, who's joined the team by this point in 1986, taking over from Simon Groom. And she's telling us And she's actually really good. She's going on here, but she also makes this quip. I don't know if you remember. She makes this quip about, oh, everybody's going to hate her because she's a health and fitness freak and all this sort of stuff. And she seems a little bit worried about it. Bless her.
And then they showed us the exercise bike scene from To the Vervoids, that one that ultimately regenerated the 6th Doctor into the 7th.
Yeah. But this was a great way for them to talk
Exercise
about.
bike of doom.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's the
Oh,
one.
I'll write that down. That's a series.
Mhm.
Exercise bike of doom. Right, cut John out of royalties. Right, so we've got all that there. But this was great. I mean, here was Blue Peter coming back big time. And as you say, I think it was practically the entire show that they handed over to the return of Trial of a Time. But Blue Peter was there to support the Doctor because the BBC was working very mysteriously. And if you go and look at our interview with Richard Marson on our Merchandise Paradise show, Richard actually explains that Blue Peter had its enemies in the BBC as well. And the two shows ran parallel with this because, Blue Peter was threatened with the axe several times. Now, none of us knew this as kids because it depended who was in management. So go and have a look at that interview because he's very candid. He's very frank about it. And he does say, look, it wasn't all plain sailing, no pun intended, considering the Moti logo for Blue Peter. But yeah, I mean, this was a great one to have at the time. And Blue Peter stretching out to say, we're here to support you, giving you a massive feature about this. So they got to talk about the mysterious planet, Mind Warp, and Terror of the Vervoids. They didn't talk about the ultimate foe. And I reckon that's for reasons we now know.
Yes.
Yeah.
It would make sense, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And also there was no monsters really in those last two, were there really?
No, probably not.
Yeah.
No.
Peter's asking here, was that set put up just for Blue Peter? Yes, it was. It was just put up. The console was brought into the Blue Peter studio and all done there. And the Thing King is saying he remembers that bit in the show. I think most of us did. I mean, as I say, I was moving away from it thinking at that point, but I'd seen in the Radio Times they were going to talk about Doctor Who. I wasn't expecting it to be as long as it was, and I'm so glad I pressed play and record on the VHS because I watched it back and back and back until the Saturday.
Yeah.
I really whet my appetite. And then Saturday, September, the 6th of September rolled around, but that's another story for another show. We've got here as well, great show with Richard, JT. Thank you for watching it, Pete. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It is a good show. I'm not just saying that, but he is good to talk to. So we're up to 1986. Memories coming back, hopefully everybody, except for Bedweer, because he's too young. Bedweer, what happened in Doctor Who in 1987?
Another new Doctor.
Hooray!
Hey.
He knows it. It did. Shortly after the Trial of a Time Lord, of course, here comes Doctor number 7 knocking on the door. And this is the day that he did his press release outside the BBC with Bonnie. So what they've done, the Blue Peter team here, probably heralded by the legend herself, Biddy Baxter, has been sent out into the garden to say, get him on our show. Mm-hmm. That's what I would imagine has happened. And he did. And it was just an impromptu chat with Janet Ellis, whom he had worked with before on a television show for children's BBC called Jigsaw.
Yeah.
The connections here are intense. Well, I think they are. Anyway, so this was 1987 March. Sylvester is launched to the Blue Peter audience as the 7th Doctor Who, and he gives a very impromptu, energetic performance. Now, he had been on the show a few months before as the Pied Piper, which is the show John Nathan Turner had seen him in and thought, oh, yes, there's my next Doctor. But you can actually see the delight on his face because he hasn't a clue what's going on, gentlemen, has he?
Adrenaline rush.
No.
Yeah.
It is because he doesn't know, though, does he? I mean, he's just like, where am I going? What am I doing? Who's this? At one point, he wonders if Goldie is K9. I mean, he can't even remember K9's name.
I remember his last line. I think he says, "I know I do," and then smiles at the camera.
And he does that sort of little laugh, and that was the end of that. It was a very simple, very quick introduction to the 7th Doctor, and then that was it. That was it. And again, do any of you guys remember that? Do you remember seeing it live?
I
definitely.
I remember indeed, and I also remember being horrified. I was not at the time looking forward to Mr. McCoy becoming the Doctor because I had an association with him being a slapstick bit part player in a whole lot of other shows that I'd seen. And to be honest, this particular appearance, and you're very much right, it was ad hoc. It didn't fill me with sort of trepidation going forward about what his portrayal was going to be like. So For me, it was all a bit, oh dear.
Oh,
Wrong, ultimately, but at the time, that's how I felt.
yeah. Okay. And that's fair enough because, you know, I reckon that was because of the speed, because they obviously did use sticky back plastic and double-sided sticky tape for speed to get everything into the studio and get that bit done, didn't they? Because it did seem very quick. The questions weren't as structured as they were for Colin, for example. So it was just a case, right, we've got him being launched to the press today. It happens to be a Blue Peter day, get him on. But he does look, I mean, you can see it in the picture. Let's bring the picture back up there for you. He does look a bit sort of like, oh, where am I? What's happening? What's going on?
What
He
have I done?
looks so young, doesn't he?
He does, yes. Oh my goodness, keep the comments coming. We're loving getting all the comments here, everybody, so thank you very much. Peter is like they just shoved him on there. I totally agree. And Sam, thank you for your comments as well. The Richard Marston episode is fantastic. Thank you for watching and supporting that. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Watch it again. So listen, what we've got here then is we are now at the point, this is 1987 now. Blue Peter at this point didn't feature Doctor Who again while it was on air. And let's face it, they may have known what was in the air like we did as fans, but Doctor Who, as we all know, finished in 1989. Blue Peter didn't. Blue Peter sailed into the 90s stronger than ever before with new look, variations on the theme, new casts, almost like Doctor Who used to. And it went right through to the 90s. And this is where Pertwee starts to get into Blue Peter and starts watching Blue Peter. And what was your first Blue Peter introduction to Doctor Who, Pertwee? What's your first memory?
I think every now and then they do like a TARDIS effect for, you know, some of their like Christmas pantos and stuff like that. So there was always that sort of element. But for me, unfortunately, I don't think because of rights issues they were able to promote the 96 Paul McGann TV movie, which we've also recently talked about on this channel.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until 1999 where they very randomly did a Doctor Who special.
Absolutely. And what do you remember about it most?
Well, I mean, what I remember most about it was the monsters. It was always monsters.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, what this was is let's just explain this as well before you talk a bit more. 1999, everybody. While some of us were getting ready for the millennium bug to hit us and worrying about our bank accounts and whether we'd be able to get into our buildings at work, Blue Peter did this, and they brought this back. I mean, look at, and actually that's Katie Hill, I think her name is. Apologies, Katie, you're after my time. But there's Katie dressed as the fourth Doctor. That's Stuart Miles, who looks fantastic as the fifth Doctor. He's built for that outfit. Come on, let's face it. And that's Blue Peter's longest running presenter to date, Connie Hook, who's playing the third Doctor. Now, this has come about because of the aforementioned Mr. Richard Marston, Doctor Who fan himself, who at this point has been working on BBC for a little while and is now the editor. There he is at work, behind the scenes. One of his own pictures. Thank you, Richard. And so, being the Doctor Who fan he is, he managed to tie this in. Good old Richard, keeping the Blue Peter Doctor Who connection going. Because do you remember something Pertwee called the Cyber Cafe feature or something like this? What was this about?
I don't know. I can't remember if it was a regular feature or whether it was just for this thing. But obviously, the internet was booming. Kids were
accessing. It was new. That's where it was.
Yeah, it was the new thing, and
9 years old.
Like everyone else of that age, I was going on Doctor Who websites and trying to learn more about the program that I loved. And so you had this really bizarre early shot in the program where you had some monsters sat at computer screens.
This one,
yeah, there you go.
Look, there's K9, everyone. There's K9. Woo!
K9 back again. Yes, you've got a Vervoid, a Sontaran, and a Hemivore sat surfing the net.
As you do.
It's slightly camp as well, isn't it? Though, do you not think it's slightly camp that as well? I do love that. And what the presenters tend to do then is they explain what Doctor Who was, wouldn't they? With two young Doctor Who fans who had set up one of the first Doctor Who websites, and they tied it in with this whole feature about what is the internet and what's out there. Genius. And again, showing Blue Peter being relevant to the day, introducing this brand new thing that was launched in the United Kingdom and created here in the United Kingdom. Americans. Oh, yes. And launching it on their show and telling the UK viewing public what it was and what you could do. And then to bring Doctor Who into it, stroke of genius. Stroke of genius.
Well, that was genius. Getting the monsters to do some sort of weird catwalk was bizarre, and that you then had a Cyberman trying to find the step with his heel, as they would at the time, trying to get off the step. This is live television. They could have fallen flat on their faces, and that would have ruined the effect of the monsters. But somehow they all managed to navigate themselves off. They had Daleks pop up later on, and Blue Peter did some random stuff, but this was as random as it got, especially in 1999.
Can I just mention there, Pertwee, that the picture you had up there, JT, of the creatures at their computer consoles in the background, the Vervoid, it looks as though that could have fitted into Terror of the Vervoid, as if you just got rid of one of those Megarians, the humans who sat at the cafe playing a game. Anyway, so that will have been a lost shot from Terror of the Vervoid.
Yeah,
it's funny you mentioned the Vervoid. I've got a vague recollection, and I could be wrong. In 1992, they did a preview, like the Five Faces, but for the Time Meddler season of Repeats on BBC Two. And
they did.
Yvette Fielding was dressed up as a partial Vervoid. She had a face greened up, and she had the mask on. It looked really weird. I don't know what was going on.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. That was 1992. The reason I didn't, I couldn't find any pictures of it. It's very odd. I couldn't find any pictures of them at all. There must be some out there somewhere in collections or in the Blue Peter books, the famous Blue Peter book, but I couldn't find any. But what they did, in 1992, there was a repeat season on BBC Two, which a lot of us were excited for. And we got things like the Time Meddler, didn't we? And it was on every week, every Friday night, I think, if I remember correctly. The 90s are a bit of a blur for me. But it was on Friday nights before you went out disco dancing. And Blue Peter again brought that. What are you laughing at? Blue Peter brought that back in again to do that whole thing. But this one in 1999 has a huge impact on a potential audience, because they got letter after letter after letter after letter from young viewers saying how much they liked Doctor Who. And it was this show where really the Blue Peter production team suddenly realized actually there's a market, because of course by this time all the videos were coming out. We had satellite television that the monsters were being seen on, the episodes were being seen on. Here in the late 90s was a crowd that we would encounter just a few years later coming through, guys, at the conventions, or for a certain age, maybe even into our workplaces or into some of the pubs. And the big thing about this show is they brought in Louise Jameson, and she explained about the companions, some of the monsters. She explained about Leela. I mean, how fantastic to bring Louise into this and to get Lou into this and talking about Doctor Who. I mean, Lou hadn't been seen on the show for a couple of years at this point. But how brilliant is this? 1999, everybody.
This like Janet Fielding with her. Who's that with her?
That's Katie. That's one of the presenters. That's Katie. Look how hip the presenters got in the 90s. No longer were the aunties and uncles. These were big sisters and big brothers and trendy cousins now, weren't they? They were very hip in the 90s.
So Louise Jameson was doing EastEnders at the time. So she was quite not a regular, but people had seen her recently on a big BBC show. So she was probably a really sensible call to bring a former companion in. And you mentioned, this was the era of the videos, and I think there was a competition to win some of the videos. Yes. And I'm of that era where we were discovering Doctor Who on the internet and via the video collection, and it tapped into that. And this is where Richard Marsden and Blue Peter generally know exactly what their audience is interested in and how to target and talk to them about what they want to hear, not just put out material that they're not interested in.
Having looking at this particular episode here as well, and seeing some of the comments that have allegedly been made by young people at the time, as somebody who, I was 29 and 99 and had other things to do and was always working when Blue Peter was on anyway, so I missed this episode, obviously. And in those days, we didn't have iPlayer. I wasn't going to set a video because I'd moved on to a Blu-ray by then because, I was posh, I was very up on the technology. But, it was wonderful to understand here. Blue Peter was publicizing a show that the BBC had written off. Let's face it, the BBC was not interested in. They'd written it off. And here in 92 and again in 99, they're there for the Doctor. They're there for the show. They're showing their support. And I think they had a real pivotal role here in preparing for what was about to happen. This is 1999. And we're on the cusp here of the modern version. Let's face this. So these kids that are watching Blue Peter here are a ready-made audience for what was about to happen. Do you not think, guys? I think that is really, really interesting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of people might think, Richard Marston, he was a fan, so therefore he would promote this. That may well be the case, but nonetheless, he's also got his job to do, and he's got to be a very thorough editor of a program and keep that program popular and relevant. So he must have known about the quality of Doctor Who, the unending quality of the principle and the ethos and the whole idea behind Doctor Who is a solid one, and a solid one enough that he must have felt that it was his duty as part of this institution that was Blue Peter to make another generation aware of that they could access this program through VHS and DVD at the time, to allow them the chance to see it, to see if they wanted to go along with it or not. And in doing so, set the seeds for what was to come, as you say, in a few years hence. I think that's part of his remit as the editor of that's in the same way that Blue Peter could promote a book or a series by an author, in terms of books, whatever it is, magazines, whatever, sport. It was equally their role to promote this valuable cultural icon that was Doctor Who. So good on him.
Yeah, absolutely good on him.
Yeah, because they always did history. They did the summer assignments. You learnt about history. You learnt about culture. You learnt a whole range on this magazine program. Now, obviously, when I was teaching in the early noughties, I noticed the kids, because you were hearing rumours of the TV program possibly coming back. And it shows you the vital role of Blue Peter, because in the 90s of really repeatedly explaining what this program was all about, which they had to do to keep it going. Because when I was talking to the kids in the early 2000s at school, they really didn't understand the concept. And so Blue Peter for a decade had kept that flame going.
Yes.
Almost in readiness, because it is, as John said, a really good concept. The trouble is it needs explaining.
Yes.
Yeah. And Blue Peter did that beautifully through the 90s. And I'm prepared to, I'll tell you something else what Blue Peter did in the 90s, which may have been missed by some Doctor Who fans. They gave us the third Romana, because we have Mary Tam, Lalla Ward, and then another tenuous link he puts into this show very quickly. Blue Peter hired a Romana. There she is. Her real name, Romana Anuzio. And she presented Blue Peter in the 90s as well. So there we are. There's the third Romana. I just wanted to throw that in. Yes, a lovely tenuous link, but I just thought I couldn't leave that one out, could I?
No.
So we're on the cusp now of the noughties, and of course Doctor Who is back. 2004. It's announced in 2003, the big anniversary year. They start production properly, filming it anyway in 2004, and it comes back in 2005. And Blue Peter is there again with an open arms to say welcome back to the fold. And crikey, they scored one here because they got Christopher Eccleston onto the show. I was surprised that Christopher Eccleston even knew what Blue Peter was, if you know what I mean. He says, getting slightly political, because this wouldn't have been the sort of show that he would have watched as a kid, I am sure. But
he would have watched Magpie on the other side.
Oh yeah, definitely being that. Yeah. But anyway, they even managed to get him to smile, which I am so impressed about. That's brilliant. So that was up, and they did their bit here as again Blue Peter, and then it was all go, because the year after K9's back. Woo!
Hey.
Yeah, there he is. And of course, there what he's doing is K9 was being interviewed about school reunion in 2006. He wasn't alone though, because the one and only Elizabeth Sladen joined him, making her debut on Blue Peter, the first time she's been on Blue Peter. Can you just imagine? And here she is in 2006, explaining to the young viewers who Sarah Jane Smith was, when she traveled with them. They had clips, of course, of her with Doctor 3 and 4. She was explaining in a beautiful way the role of the companion, who K9 was, how she'd come across K9. Oh, it was just, you can see this now on YouTube, and it's wonderful to see. There's our Liz, just being fantastic. And this is Gethin Jones, the Blue Peter, one of the Blue Peter presenters at the time, who desperately was trying to find out if we'd see any more of Sarah Jane. But of course, she wasn't saying anything at that point. But we certainly did see more of Gethin, because he became a Dalek and a Cyberman in Blue Peter films. So that's him rehearsing for, what was it, The Rise of... Remind me. There we go. And there he is in costume doing the choreographed walk. So he's one of the Cybermen in that. Blue Peter at this point, of course, always tied in Doctor Who competitions, and this new era was a gift. As Richard says in our interview with him on Merchandise Paradise, Russell T Davies was very, very keen to make sure that the link between Blue Peter and Doctor Who was as strong as ever. And so Blue Peter launched another, see, I told you they're good at recycling the ideas, another designer monster competition, which they had record numbers of entries for, which just showed that in 2005, the show was so huge. David Tennant was the incoming Doctor, and he joined Gethin and the Blue Peter team with Dalek on set. And this is the competition that gave us the now famous Absorbaloff from Love and Monsters, which appeared in 2006. Yeah. And there's the young man that drew him and created him. And we'll move on.
Bless him.
So, I don't know how old that little lad will be now, but come on the show. We'd like a chat. No, I'm kidding. It was brilliant. Not the last competition, though, of course. And some of you may remember the Junkyard TARDIS competition, Pertwee.
Yeah. So before, I mean, not skipping ahead too quickly, there was the win a part, a speaking role on the show, and there was a young lad who played Crete, I think his name was, in Utopia, and has since gone on to act in, is it Outlander?
He's in Outlander now. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
He was very good in the episode. He was really good.
Yeah, credit to him.
And his breakthrough was Blue Peter competition. I mean, Blue Peter and Doctor Who making careers. I mean, it's just insane. It's just great. That's what they used to do, isn't it?
But I can imagine that whole judging and having to phone the unsuccessful kids was far too horrible for them to attempt anything like that. So they went back to the design A something or other again, and the Junkyard TARDIS was what we had for the Doctor's wife. I remember it sitting in the sort of far corner on the lower level of the Doctor Who experience, and it was a really interesting design console. The background walls behind it were fairly minimal, which was a shame, really. I think they could have made more of it. But the console itself, you know, all these appliances that you'd find in a home was so Blue Peter, weirdly, because we spoke earlier about how you'd make stuff out of cardboard tubes and washing up liquid bottles. This felt very much like a make it yourself at home TARDIS console.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and they made it into a play set and a full size set. It was,
I wonder if that young lady who designed it got any royalties for that play set from Character Options. I've always wondered that. I was aware there was a Blue Peter competition. I knew it was going to be in the series. It turns out it's in The Doctor's Wife, isn't it? Which a lot of Doctor Who fans love that episode. We must review it one day on Who's Reviews because I'd like to talk about it. But I saw it. I mean, but in case anybody didn't, you worked at the Cardiff Doctor Who experience. You were there, and this is where I saw it because it was in there. So I had to take this picture. Hence the quality. I do apologize, but it wasn't lit up or anything like that, and it didn't look like that much. So obviously they just did what they could, because that's actually really, really cool and very ambitious. But we got that.
Yeah.
If you look at the original design and the entry and try and you look at that sort of front panel, there's so many things on that, but the space that you actually have to work with when you're creating this thing, you can't fit that much stuff on it. So
No,
yeah, I mean, I remember some really interesting features on it, and
really.
If you contrasted it, because across the other side you had the 9th and 10th console, which was similar in that it had, you know, a handbrake and, you know, other identifiable human earthbound bits of kit.
Yeah.
And then further across you had, you know, the 83 to 89 TARDIS console, which was very much buttons and switches.
Yeah.
So having that comparison with stuff was really interesting. And yeah, you know, the fact that a Blue Peter viewer designed this, and yeah, I think, you know, they could have made more of it, unfortunately, but at least they made it into a playset.
I mean, it's a thrill for any child, I think, to be able to do this, because he repeated this again for Peter Capaldi's first series. So in 2013, to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who, Blue Peter ran a design a sonic device for 3 characters in Doctor Who. So it was Madame Vastra, Jenny, and Strax.
Yeah.
And they chose 3 winners, all of whom had designed these sonic devices, all of whom appeared. I think they were in Deep Breath, correct me?
Deep Breath. No,
Yeah,
I think they were all in Deep Breath.
Yeah.
But again, Stephen Moffat was presiding over this at the time, and he had to write that episode. I mean, it shows you to an extent how good they are as writers as well, because you don't know what you're going to have to put into your show, because all these entries are coming out. So you're judging these things not just on the caliber of what's in front of you, but how would that work in a story? How would that work? So they must have been exhausted between him and Russell, looking at these things, thinking, right, I've got to write a story around all this stuff that comes through. And let's face it, most of it would have been a bit debatable, but you know, to find the ones that are going to, I'm being nice, aren't I? But to find the ones that, you know, are going to be able to be produced. Wow, what a job that must have been. So well done to everybody involved. And if you're one of those winners and you stumble across this on YouTube, congratulations, you did a cracking job.
and then of course we got the 13th Doctor Sonic.
Oh, I know, those kids did much better than that design, but that's another show. That's another show. We won't go on to that one, but that one wasn't designed by a Blue Peter viewer, because they could have done a lot better, let's face it.
Absolutely.
But we're looking at this, and this is the great thing about happens now, because Blue Peter is still going strong, and in this, the 60th anniversary of our beloved Time Lord, it is supporting Doctor Who again, and we've only just seen, I would imagine, the tip of the iceberg as to how they're going to be doing it. I'm very intrigued to know what's happening, because this year they launched another competition, and it had some fantastic prizes. The big one being the winner gets to go to the new TARDIS set, which, as we all know, is locked. Now, that is a fantastic prize, because these winners get to see that set before any of us. Yeah. And in fact, they may have actually already have visited, because it's all very secret. So it must be in the can by now, because they finished, you know, or it should be in the can by now. And we won't get to see it until the anniversary month of November itself on the show. And that's when we get to know who the winners are. But congratulations to whoever they are. And one of the biggest things about this, I mentioned it earlier, is Blue Peter has been famous since Biddy Baxter introduced the legendary Blue Peter badge. Now, there's the original one from the 70s and 80s on the left. It has now morphed, to use a present vernacular, into all these other lovely, gorgeous ones here that you get for writing in or doing something, or being musical, or being environmentally aware, or whatever it's going to be. Competition winner, I think, is the orange one. And underneath that is the very, very, very rare gold Blue Peter badge, which you get for being absolutely bloody brilliant at something. You have to save a life or create a Dalek out of boxes in Raymond Kuzik's case.
just to prove our old foginess here, just a shout out here to former children's BBC star Tony Hart, who designed the ship.
He did.
It goes on Blue Peter's logo and on the badge. So Tony Hart's legacy still lives today. Bless him.
I know. Let's have another look at that as well. If you don't know who Tony Hart is, go and look him up, because we grew up with him as well. Again, on the BBC, he did a series of programs where he taught us how to draw and paint. And what, you know, I didn't know what charcoal was until Tony Hart did it. And you can send your pictures in.
Sylvester McCoy in Vision On too.
He was on Vision On, yeah. And you can send your pictures in, and they used to put them on the wall, and the camera would just, it was called the gallery, and the TV camera would just show you at home, and you'd all look at each other's pictures, hoping in anticipation that one day your effort would appear on the wall. Mine never did, but then it was all about Doctor Who that I sent in, so I don't think Tony Hart was going to show any of them. But
Shout out to Tony for designing that.
Oh yeah, I mean, another BBC legend. But he did design the original Blue Peter ship. That is still the logo to this very, very day. And as we can see, all the Blue Peter competition winners for this year's competition, the 60th anniversary, get this absolutely gorgeous Blue Peter Doctor Who crossover badge, which I am so envious on. This is the one that the Blue Peter production team wouldn't let me have. But isn't that just a beautiful design?
It is
gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous.
Absolutely.
We've featured it on the breakfast show before when we were talking about the competition, but I am still in love with that badge. I think it just looks beautiful. And it sums up
those two iconic images of the Blue Peter ship with the diamond logo together. I mean, we've waited 60 years for that, and now we got it. It's brilliant.
Yeah. TARDIS Spider is here. It looks like Blue Peter is one of life's blessings. I mean, I think it's fair to say now, everybody in the United Kingdom would have seen Blue Peter now, because there can't be a generation now that hasn't grown up with Blue Peter, because it's been going since 1958. So no disrespect, but if you were a child before 1958, you might be in a care home by now, or life support. But you know, anybody from that age.
I saw that.
But from 1958, you know what I mean? Come on, it's. I mean, you know, it's lasted. I mean, happy birthday to them as well, because they're coming up to their 65th, aren't they? So that's it. Tony Hart is a legend here, says Peter. He was, yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking about, you know, some of the Doctor Who competitions they've run, some of the makes that they've encouraged us to do. Blue Peter was all about stimulating children, not just for that 25 minutes of the show, but beyond it.
Yes.
Getting them to be creative, getting them to make things, getting them to enter competitions, and, you know, their appeals, do stuff for the environment. It's such an amazing show.
And teachers used to use it. I don't know if teachers would do these days, but I remember teachers would watch Blue Peter and then use elements of what, because we did things about historical, and we all knew about it because we watched Blue Peter the week before. So we were confident approaching the subject, because, oh yeah, this is what happened in Blue Peter. And Leslie Judd said this, or Sarah Green said this, and you knew it and you were confident. So teachers back then were quite clever. They looked at Blue Peter, having grown up with them themselves in some cases as well. You know, they were aware of it and used it in their lessons. But back to this for the 60th anniversary here, and we had a comment there. The Thinking is saying, now that's a badge. Yeah. I think that will have to be one of the most sought after Blue Peter badges ever after this year, because of what it represents, the relationship between Blue Peter and Doctor Who, and Doctor Who's 60th. And it just shows you, it really does, you know, the Blue Peter competition this year. Again, in the email I had from the production team, they said it's been huge. It's been incredibly popular. And it shows you that no matter what generation of Blue Peter you grew up with, or if you are watching it today with the current Blue Peter team, Blue Peter is still Blue Peter, and it's still Doctor Who's best friend. And it's just a joy. I am so happy that we have taken the time out to celebrate that very unique relationship between Blue Peter and Doctor Who, because it hasn't happened with any other television show ever, as far as I'm aware. Peter wants us to remember that the Blue Peter did. Don't forget Christmas, always a nice run into the season. Yeah, and the famous one that Pertwee mentioned before is the Blue Peter pantomime, their Christmas special, which was obviously a Doctor Who show with Mark Curry running around as anything but the Doctor in name, which was fantastic. TARDIS Spiders say teachers used to form lesson plans, not the internet. And Blue Peter was one of those things over here, mate. That's how they did it. They would say, what are the kids watching this week? Oh, that's a good idea. I'll put that into the lesson last week. Let's have a look at everybody in the chat here. Fantastic. Nice to see you all. We've got some really great comments. So glad you've enjoyed this particular show. TARDIS Spider also wanted to remind us that America got the 5 Doctors first.
Nah.
Timey-wimey. we could have read the Target novel.
we could have, but we didn't.
Wasn't quite the same, though, was it? We've also got here. Hold on, I'm scrolling. We had here Jack, the lovely Jack, said, anyone know anyone with a Blue Peter badge? And then Jamie comes back saying, no, I don't know anyone who has a Blue Peter badge. Yes, you do.
Ace.
Hooray!
Yay.
He nicked it.
I did not nick it. How dare you? This I got in 1978, and I have treasured it ever since because I imagine Leslie Judd putting it in the Blue Peter envelope herself. But I got this for a suggestion. I got this for suggesting a make. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, that make was please make a Doctor Who TARDIS control room, which they eventually did about 30 years later. But this is one of my treasured items. And yes, at 29 years old, I actually used this to get into a couple of places free in London, and boy, were they not happy. They were not happy.
Was it heaven?
What? No, it was not. It was certain museums. It was certain places, and I said, "Oh, look, I've got this, and I can get in here for free." And they had to honour it. So, thank you. I'm going to try it again now. I'm 50 something. I'm going to try it again and see if I can get where I can get into one now. Peter Harrington, excuse me. Oh, well, that doesn't count. We can't talk about that because the Blue Peter production office will not like that. But there you go. We've got that there. So, guys, listen, that's us. This is our Who's Views Blue Peter Doctor Who special, celebrating that unique relationship. I hope you've all enjoyed it. I hope it's brought back some memories. It's a lot to cram into just nearly 2 hours over 60 years worth of TV shows.
Good grief. There's just one final point about Blue Peter. It is the thing about it is a bit like Doctor Who. It is quintessentially the BBC. Only the BBC would have made this sort of program. And it's a bit. If Blue Peter ever does go, it's a harbinger for the end of the BBC. If they can't hold on to something like that, then there is absolutely no point in having the BBC at all. It is something. It should go on and on forever.
Seriously, life without Blue Peter is just beyond imagining.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It scarcely bears thinking about.
It really, really does. So listen, thank you to everybody that's joined us in the chat. I hope you enjoy it. If you are watching this, please, there's another link. Not only did Sophie Aldred as Ace have 2 Blue Peter badges, but so did Rick in the Young Ones. Yes, he did. And he was a bit of a rebel, so he wore it the wrong way up. I remember it was upside down, which apparently, I believe, Biddy Baxter complained about. I'm not sure if that's true, but I heard that at the time. I remember reading it at the time.
She absolutely would.
Well,
she absolutely
I
would.
think she would do. I think she would do. Quite right too, because it was her thing.
Yeah, Biddy Baxter made sure that Sophie Aldred was allowed to wear those.
She checked. You're right, Pertwee. Yeah. She went back through those infamous files we talked about before and checked the name. And yes, she had been awarded 2 badges, so she was allowed to wear them on the telly. I love all that. I don't think you get it today, but let's find out. So listen, thank you so much for joining us for our Who Peter special, celebrating the relationship between Doctor Who and Blue Peter. It's been great to see you all. Just to point out yet again that if you want to know more about this, then Richard Marson's Backstage Pass, as I called the show, is available now on the Merchandise Paradise playlist. He talks about his time in not just on Blue Peter, but within the BBC, and it is a very honest interview. He was an absolute joy to chat with. But of course, he's also talking about his 3 books, which are available now from 10 Acre Films. The very famous books: one about Verity Lambert, one about JNT, and one about Biddy Baxter. 3 icons and legends of not just BBC television, but British television between 1960s and the late 1980s, early 1990s. So that's available for you now. And we've had some great comments about that, which I'm really chuffed about. It's been wonderful. So again, thank you all for watching. Please like the video. Please share the video. Please subscribe to our channel and join us again on Who's Views. We've got a lot of content coming for you this month, next month, the month after. So stay with us. So in true Blue Peter style, what do we say? Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. See you on Thursday.
Oh.